Okay, good morning, folks. How's it going? Just about 2.5 minutes until the class starts. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry, getting some emails. That's what the chime is all about. Morning, Kenny. Hi, Celine. How's it going, Naaman? Good morning, Kevin. Hi, Janice, Jerry, Brittany. Hope everything's going good. Hey, Brandon and Alexis. Thank you guys for being here. Hey, Sebastian and Melanie, Sophia, Angel and Angel, Gloria, Jocelyn, Cameron, Malia. Nice. Welcome back. Hey, Rudy. Just a couple moments here. Should be good to go. Hey, Paula. Hey, Sheely, Kobe. Okay, everybody, let's just get rolling. It's 10 a.m., so welcome back, and it's good to see you guys as usual. To all those now arriving and that are already here, good morning. It's Thursday, February the 18th, so we have a clear plan and a clear schedule. We're just going to continue through the lecture notes in the order that you see listed in the calendar. We have to wrap up the discussion of Robert McKim's paper that we were working on last time, The Hiddenness of God. And then whenever we finish his material, we have one last author on this subject of philosophy of religion. Next week, we're going to move on from this topic. But we'll try our best to finish up the McKim, and then if we can, talk about Nicholas Everett's article. And those are the last few pieces in this unit of the course. Welcome back, Allison and Stephanie, Nathan, Alessandra, Kate. So yeah, if you didn't yet have a chance, I think probably most of you already have, just looking at the live stream and the live chat. But if you haven't had a chance, make sure to note your attendance by having some kind of comment in our live chat. And okay, let's just continue from there. As usual, if you ever have questions, comments, reactions to anything that's being said or discussed, jump right in and let me know, and we can just have a chat about anything. Okay. So for the moment, we're going to just kind of go back into this author, Robert McKim, and his 2001 paper called The Hiddenness of God. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Let's see if you guys can help us kind of set the table for this essay again. So let me know. Yeah. Thanks, Alessandra. I'm sure that the classmates appreciate it. Question for you guys from me. What do you remember about the initial presentation of the hiddenness of God? So I know that we talked a little bit about it. Maybe you can help me get back into the lecture by telling me what comes to mind when I mention this author. So he had a scenario. Let's start with that. What was the big hypothetical scenario mentioned by the author to get the argument started. Let's just jump off from there. Can't perceive God with the five senses. Yes, then there's the island scenario. Okay, very good, guys. Just kind of making sure we're all on the same page. So let me just briefly review that. In the case of Robert McKim's essay, he's exploring this topic of God being hidden, meaning that unlike you and me, God cannot be quickly and easily verified to exist just by using the five senses. So nobody has to guess or debate my existence or yours because you could just see us and hear us, etc. With God, though, he's hidden in that way. Like he's not just openly present to your vision or whatever, or to your hearing. So God being hidden makes some people doubt whether he exists or not. To explore the significance of God being hidden and what it means for the rationality of our beliefs, he gives us this hypothetical scenario to kind of gauge our intuitions, okay? So in the scenario, there was this island. The island is like isolated from outside contact, and everybody that lives there, as far as they know, it's the only place where there are human beings because nobody on the island has ever left. And as far as they remember going back in the past, nobody has come from outside. So they think that maybe they're the only, realm of human civilization. But there are rumors and legends from the old elders of the community. Some of them say that this used to be a part of a bigger empire, this one island, and that it used to be run by a big, great, good emperor. But people don't know if these are myths, legends, or if there's any factual truth to them. So anyway, that's the state of play. One day, though, ships start rolling in from outside of the island, to everyone's great surprise. And people gather on the beach to see the arriving ships. Down from the ships come some people, and they say to the gathered crowd, all right, guys, so those legends were not just myths, they're true. The island that you're on right now is part of a bigger empire, and you guys have just kind of lost touch with the remaining part of the empire. Also, the part about the emperor, that's also true. This emperor is great, he's good, he sent us to you to give the message that he wants you to become his loyal followers. And the thing is, though, he's hidden. We call him the hidden emperor because nobody's ever seen, heard, or perceived him at all with any of the five senses. So he won't reveal himself out in the open, even to his most loyal followers. But they say, we believe he exists and that he has these amazing powers of invisibility and reading minds and being in more than one place at a time. Anyway, that's what we think about our hidden emperor. So the question remains, will you become loyal to him or no? After that, a couple of people from the crowd step forward and give their thoughts. Okay, so one of the people is just described in the text as a bearded man. So I'm trying my best. There we have the bearded guy, all right? And maybe even a little longer of a beard, eh? So he steps up, as the crowd is buzzing and talking about this new information. And he says, okay, I've got some questions, though. I'm not so sure about what I'm hearing. Why is this guy, the emperor, hidden? What is up with the hidden thing? I followed you all the way until you started talking about he's hidden, and that's where you lost me. What do you mean that he's hidden? Why can't we just see him? You're asking us to declare our loyalty to him and really just devote ourselves to him. But how can we do that if his existence isn't clear? Many of us, me included, this is speaking as the bearded man, would not be comfortable devoting ourselves in such a, dedicated and all-out way to a being that we're not even sure is real. So why shouldn't he just show himself? And then we can all agree that he's real and it's fair and justified for us to be his subjects. Also, it's strange. He wants to stay hidden. So if he wants to be hidden, then why are you even talking about him? This is all confusing to me. So this guy says, you know what? My conclusion is these messengers are either misinformed or they're trying to deceive us. I don't think there's really any such thing as the hidden emperor. That's his point of view, the bearded man, okay? But he's not the only person with an opinion on this. So after he steps forward and gives his thoughts, another person from the crowd comes out, and she's just described as a woman from the crowd. So here she is. I know not every woman has long hair, but whatever. I'm just trying to create a quick image. So she has the opposite perspective from him. She says, you know what, though? I kind of think maybe there's a valid reason that he wants to stay hidden. the hidden emperor. I can sort of see the point behind that, because think about it. If he wasn't hidden and you could just see him like us, then there would be no real decision about whether to believe in him. It would be like impossible not to believe in him if you could just see him. So maybe he wants to give us the choice whether to believe. He wants to it's a test of loyalty, as it were. If it's just so easy and immediately apparent that the being exists, then that gives us no choice, and therefore it's not like a real test of our faith. Also, maybe there's a reason for him to stay hidden, because it creates a kind of hierarchy, because he's above us since we're not hidden and he is. So that might enhance the feeling of his authority and majesty over and beyond us. So I kind of think that there is this hidden emperor, and his hiddenness is based on these valid reasons. Okay, so she says this, but the bearded man is unswayed, and he comes back in with his rebuttal, and he says, I understand what you're saying, but still it's nonsense to me. If this so-called hidden emperor is real and he wants us to believe in him, wouldn't the most obvious and simple thing be to just reveal himself, and then there would be no question? Wouldn't he want us to know that he exists instead of putting us in a position where we kind of have to just guess or speculate about it? You're telling us, you guys from the ship, you're telling us that he wants us to believe that he exists, but he refuses to make himself apparent to us, even though he could. So I just don't think there's an emperor. I'm coming back with the same results. Now, a third guy steps forward from the audience, and he's described kind of as like a middle ground in between the other two. Okay, so this guy is like, break it up, you two. I think you both have some reasonable points. And so let me try to split the difference between these two opposite sides. The middle ground guy says, okay, so in your defense, the skeptic and others are saying there's no evidence that the hidden emperor exists. They're saying there's no evidence at all, which is not quite correct. There is some evidence. What could the evidence be? Well, first of all, just the fact that these missionaries are here giving us testimony that he exists. So that's not like direct observable evidence of the emperor himself, but it's not nothing. It's people attesting to his existence, and so that's something to go on. Also, we have the half-remembered legends of our elders, and that kind of corresponds to what these people are saying too. So we shouldn't say there's no evidence at all. But at the same time, you also had a valid point when you said that it's a bit strange for the emperor to be asking us to believe in him if he really won't reveal himself. So I come up with my own kind of middle ground position. And his middle position is that the emperor is hidden, and this could mean one of two possible things. It could mean, number one, that there actually is no emperor, and that would simply explain the appearance that he's hidden. Or it could be that he does exist, chooses to stay hidden, but if that is so, if he's deliberately staying hidden and he exists, then maybe he doesn't really care so much whether we believe in him or not, contrary to what the missionaries are saying, that he really wants us to believe in him. Because I feel what you said, where you're like, if he cared about us believing him, then he would make it easy for us to do that. So maybe there's an emperor that doesn't care whether we believe in him, and that's why he's staying hidden. Or it could be that there's no such emperor at all. So he's saying that's his kind of nuanced, intermediate point of view. And obviously, if you guys are thinking about it critically, the whole essay and his scenario, the author's scenario, these individuals in the story are really just kind of symbols of positions that people can take on the real debate we are having, which is whether God exists or whether you should believe in God. So this individual, the bearded man, he stands for the skeptic about God's existence. The type of person who says, if I can't perceive it, then it must not exist. On the other hand, she's the person that represents the believer. The person that says, although it's maybe mysterious that God is cloaked from our senses, I still believe in him, and I think that there are reasons for him to want this hiddenness. This guy in the middle represents what McKim calls the tentative believer. And it is the tentative believer, so I put a little asterisk here, that the author ends up siding with. Okay, so basically here's the point. God being hidden, he thinks, might show us there's no God. Or it could be that if there's a God, just like the hidden emperor, the fact that he refuses to disclose himself to us may mean that he doesn't care whether we believe in him or not. Okay, so having listed those reasons and arguments, McKim now goes and discusses what he calls disadvantages of God being hidden. Okay, so he says these are things that are not ideal, that would all be better if God wasn't hidden. Okay, so let me provide the heading just at disadvantages of God's hiddenness. Disadvantages of God being hidden. So these, he thinks, are the things that are not so good, that are less than ideal, which are results of God being hidden in the way he's describing. Okay, so one of them, to start off with, is that it makes it harder for everybody to believe in God. That's one disadvantage there. It makes it harder for people to just simply believe in God. Ask yourself, why is it that some people don't believe in God? Now, some think, maybe have the wrong idea, like they have a stereotype, like, oh, some people are just evil, or they're just deviant, or they just hate the idea of authority or something. No, most, I would say, just simply think, I wouldn't believe in something unless there was better evidence. I can't believe in something that I can't see or verify with my own five senses. But ask yourself, what would make it so that everyone could easily form the belief in God? Well, if he was out in the open, easy to see or verify through your five senses, then I don't think anybody would have any doubt anymore. That would eliminate atheism straight away. So, if God wasn't hidden, we wouldn't have the questions that we are debating in this class. Does God exist? What are the arguments for and against? There could be no argument if you could just simply look and see there is God. So one thing is that if he wasn't hidden, it would be easy for everybody to believe in him. Because he's hidden, it's making it a little harder for some people to overcome their skepticism about not being able to easily perceive him. So in the theistic traditions that we know of, the major world religions, it's emphasized that you ought to believe in God and that you should feel a sense of pride in believing. And that if you don't believe, that that's bad, or that you should even feel shame or guilt for not believing. But how much sense does that make if we're put in a position where God is not apparent to the five senses? So his hiddenness produces uncertainty and disagreement about whether he does exist. And that would not be so if he wasn't hidden. Okay, so another disadvantage that he says that has to do with God being hidden is that it also makes it harder for people to maintain a close personal relationship with God. Okay, so in the major world religions that we all know about, for example, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, especially Christianity in particular, it's emphasized not just that you're supposed to believe in God. I mean, that's a minimum thing, yes, but on top of that, they say that you should establish and maintain a kind of close personal relationship with God throughout your life as well. But ask yourself, what does a close relationship involve? It involves things like trust, communication, the sharing of secrets, vulnerabilities, hopes, dreams, fears. These are things that some people are not so confident or secure in doing if the being on the other end of the relation is hidden so that they're not sure that they exist. And so wouldn't it be easier for everybody to engage in this type of personal, confessional, intimate relationship if the being was known to exist for sure? I think that in case God was not hidden, people would rush to form this kind of relationship and carry it with them through life. But because he's hidden, and because the person is not certain, therefore, that the relationship has a separate member to it, that makes it harder for everybody to engage in these types of relationships. So to the extent that this is another important part of your faith or your religion, it's a little bit harder for people to maintain and establish, given that God is hidden. And once again, if he wasn't hidden, neither of these disadvantages would be there. Okay, we're still going through disadvantages of God's hiddenness, but I want to erase the header so that I can create more space for the points that fall within it. So there's two of the disadvantages. Another one is that it makes it harder for people to devote themselves to and to worship God. Says makes it harder for people to devote themselves to and to worship God. Okay, so going along the same lines, in religion, you know that it's supposed to be not just that you believe in God, not just that you have this close personal relationship with him, but you're also supposed to be totally devoted to God, to submit yourself to the will of God, to worship him, to praise God, to spread his word, and all of those things. So it's not just like you're supposed to have a kind of casual acquaintance relationship with God. You're supposed to worship him, exalt him, sing his praises as the most high being, and all of that. But ask yourself, what does it take for someone to enter into that type of devotional stance to another being? To like put yourself at the feet of a superior being and say, I worship you, I pray to you, I praise you. It takes a lot of humility, and it takes, for some people, overcoming the doubts and skepticism that the being exists. So what's standing in the way of more people feeling like they want to devote themselves to and worship a higher power? The doubt and uncertainty about whether the being really exists. So if he wasn't hidden, I'm sure people would rush to fully supplicate themselves at the feet of God, because there would be no doubts anymore whether he existed, and everyone would want to win his favor and his good providence. So here's another thing that becomes more complicated and difficult due to God being hidden. So we've got three. With God being hidden, it makes it harder for everyone to agree that he exists. It makes it harder for people to form the close, intimate relationship with God that is a characteristic feature of main religions. And it also makes it harder for people, at least some, to fully devote themselves and to worship God. But that's not all. There's still a little bit more. So I'm continuing on the same theme. He has, I think, 2 more points here. Another thing that he says is a disadvantage of God being hidden is that it creates, or it allows for social conflict and disagreement. Okay, so on this point, here's an easy question to answer. Has religion ever caused conflict in society, either on a personal level or on a larger social level? Yes. Have there ever been wars that have torn people apart on the basis of religious differences? Or have families and friendships been destroyed because of differences over religious views? Surely this has happened, and it continues to happen. But why is everybody engaged in these conflicts and fights and disagreements and wars? Well, it would be because they don't agree on what the proper interpretation of religion is, or what God's commands are, or what his actual revealed word is. So if God was not hidden, then he could simply get everybody on the same page across the globe and say, here's the true nature of the faith that I want you to practice. Take it from me directly. No need to engage in scriptural interpretation, because I'm not hidden and I'm right out, and I can just tell you exactly what I intended when I said I want you to believe in me and practice religion. So the fact that people fight and disagree is because with God being hidden, people are somewhat free to develop their own doctrines, and they're going to sometimes fight about which ones are the true revealed word of God or truly revelatory of God's will. So in the absence of some divine arbiter of these disputes just being out in the open, we're left with the controversies and disagreements, and that leads to these fights and so on. So if God wasn't hidden, then people wouldn't necessarily fight over the proper interpretation of religion or the Word of God. Okay, and then one last thing to finish off this discussion from McKim. He also says that if God being hidden, another disadvantage is that it allows for frauds, con artists to operate. So allows con artists and frauds to operate. Okay, so think about this. Has anybody ever in the world used the idea of religion for their own selfish purposes to advance their own agenda? Surely, yes. There have been people who've said the only way to win the favor of God is to give me money or to be a member of my religious cult. And I'm a direct channel through which God speaks, sending a message to all of you. And now you're my loyal subjects doing whatever I want. Like think of cult leaders like the Jim Jones massacre, or think about certain quasi-religious figures that use their religious identity to make a lot of money and profit. Even if you go back a little ways in the history of the church, there was the sale of indulgences, a practice since condemned by everyone universally, including the church itself. And that was a practice in the medieval period where they said, if you're wealthy enough, you can pay to win the favor of God and it's admitted into heaven. Anyway, so whether it's the modern day, like infomercial sort of con artist hawking a religious message, cult leader, or these historical practices, what allows these con artists and frauds to operate? Well, if God is hidden, then he can't step forward and say, excuse me, but that's not at all consistent with my message to mankind or with my will. So if God is cloaked in invisibility and hidden from view, then these con artists have the space they need to say, hey, I'm the one that's receiving the real divine inspired word of God. And they won't be checked or invalidated by the divine being himself who wasn't hidden. So, okay, with God hidden, just to summarize, he says there's the whole set of disadvantages. It makes it harder for everyone to believe. It makes it harder for people to have this close personal relationship. It makes it harder for people to devote themselves to and worship God. It causes social conflict and disagreement. And finally, it also allows for con artists and frauds to operate with impunity. So in the end, his conclusion, he repeats, is the tentative believer's position. If there is a God and he's hidden, and he's okay with letting us live with all these disadvantages, then maybe this is a being that doesn't actually care one way or the other whether you believe in him. Because if he did care, then he would reveal himself, would not be hidden, and then it would be easy for us to believe that he exists. So now let me just mention how this could be utilized as an objection to Pascal. Remember Pascal's wager? He said the reason that you should just choose to believe in God, or why that's the safer bet, is because when you believe, you put no risk, but you might get a big reward. And if you don't believe, there's nothing to win, and you might take a big loss if you're wrong. But that whole picture depends on a prior assumption that God does care whether you believe in him or not. Because only a being that cares whether you believe would have any motive to reward you for belief or to punish you for not believing. But suppose we take Robert McKim's point seriously, that God being hidden raises questions about whether he even cares that we believe. If it is so that God doesn't care what your status of belief is, then there would be no reason to assume that the Pascal's wager has these stakes that he's emphasizing. Because if God doesn't care whether you believe, then a believer doesn't necessarily get rewarded. And if God doesn't care whether you believe, then a non-believer does not necessarily get punished either. So if we're going to start questioning how God dispenses with souls in the afterlife, then the wager will fall apart because it's based around certainty that he rewards believers and punishes non-believers, come what may. I also think that's a funny point in Pascal's writing, because if you look at it, there's a little contradiction, sort of. He starts off by saying no one could ever prove that God exists because he's way beyond our powers of judgment and comprehension. So we could never know anything about him or prove that he exists. But then just right after that, he says, but I know this much for sure. He definitely rewards believers and punishes non-believers if he exists. Well, which one is it, Pascal? Do we know nothing about God because he's too infinite? Or do we know specific things, like he certainly rewards believers and punishes non-believers? Seems kind of like he wants to have it both ways, but I digress. So hopefully you can see now another possible objection to the wager given by McKim. He poses questions about God being hidden and what that means in terms of whether he even cares that we believe in it. And that's the essential point. If he didn't care, as McKim suggests, due to him being hidden, then this must mean or may mean that he doesn't take an interest in whether we believe. If so, the stakes mentioned by the Pascal in the wager no longer exist. Okay, so we're all good, I think, guys, with the Robert McKim article. So that was what I wanted to finish up on that. And now that we're done with him, we're going to move on to the next author in this series. And there's only one more then on philosophy of religion, so I think we'll be able to finish it today. And starting off next week, we'll get a fresh start on a second topic of our semester. Okay, so one more author though, Nicholas Everett. Nicholas Everett. Let me open the book here. Yeah, so it's from 2004. Theism and Modern Science. Theism and Modern Science by Nicholas Everett. So this is a relatively young, current-day philosopher, Nicholas Everett. He's a British philosopher. He's from England. And he teaches at the University of East Anglia in England. He wrote this paper in 2004, Theism and Modern Science. That's what we're now going to look at. Let me just give you a quick preview of the overall topic and content of the paper. So, as you can see from the title, he wants to explore whatever tensions and contradictions exist between modern science and classical religious views. Probably a lot of you have heard that science and religion somewhat don't go together, that a person perhaps who's thoroughly scientific in their worldview would not have a religious perspective, or vice versa, that if someone was very devoutly religious, that they may reject certain scientific claims or theories. Some people think that the two things are not incompatible, that they really say, if you interpret them the right way, the same things. But many others, and I would say probably the majority, do see at least some tensions and inconsistencies between science and religion. So what Nicholas Everett is going to do here in the paper is try and expose for us what the real contradictions are between modern scientific understanding of the universe and what religion teaches. And in the end, he's going to say there really are these contradictions. Science and religion are not in line with one another. And so that's his point. He's going to try to show us why science and the theories that we have consensus on today contradict viewpoints that have been expressed in religion. Okay, so he's a person that says yes, science and religion don't really go together. His goal in the paper is to try and show the reader why not. Okay, so let's try and understand his view or his argument. That's just his name, the date of publication, and the title. Okay, so now he says in traditional world religions, Christianity, for example, we're given a certain picture of God's intention in creating the universe and mankind. But any claim that a being with a certain intention and a certain nature exists allows us to form some expectations about what the being would be likely to do. And that gives us the ability to predict how things would be if the being, in fact, did exist. If we look at the world and we don't see it to be the way we would have expected if the being existed, then that gives evidence that the being does not exist. So to be a little clearer, there's this argument that he provides on page 66, and this outlines the framework of his thinking here. So let me just write the argument down on the board one time, and then I'll try and break it down and give you an example that he gives to explain it. So pardon me for the fact that some of the information in these premises of the argument look a little technical at first, but I'll bring it down to earth and it'll not be too hard once I show you that. So the first premise of the argument says this: if there is a being with nature n, so n here, the letter, is just a placeholder, like a variable for whatever the specific attributes of the being would be. So we just leave that as a kind of blank. If there is a being with nature N and intentions I, so I is also just a little placeholder for whatever the given intentions would be of the hypothesized being. So again, if there is a being with nature N and intentions I, then in that case, the being will produce change C in the world. And with the letter C, change C, that is just a reference to whatever the actual behavior you would expect this being to do would be. Okay, so in more simplified terminology, what this says is that if there was a certain type of being with certain characteristics and with certain goals, then in that case, it would do some things in the world. It would produce certain expected behaviors in the world. The second premise merely continues by saying that the world, though, does not display these changes. These changes are not seen in the world. So the world does not display C. So the conclusion, placed below this line at the bottom, the conclusion is that, therefore, there is evidence that the being does not exist. Okay, so now I'm going to walk you guys through this, and we're going to make sure it's all clear. One more time. If there's a being with a certain nature and intentions, then it would produce certain changes, but the world doesn't show those changes. So therefore, there's evidence that the being doesn't really exist. To give you an example that we can then apply to the argument, the author says, consider a scenario of a person shipwrecked on a deserted island. Okay, so hypothetical scenario time, guys. Have any of you ever heard of a film or movie or a TV show with this kind of plot line where somebody, traveling or doing something ended up somehow stranded on an island, apparently alone by themselves? There was a film, I don't know, maybe 20 or so years ago with Tom Hanks, Castaway. Anyone know this? You know, he's like, I think he was taking a cargo plane or something which crashed. Lost would be another example, Celine, but in Lost there's a whole number of people, similar to Gilligan's Island, a little older. But yeah, and then even if you go further back behind that, the classics of literature, Robinson Crusoe, a 19th century novel. Anyway, guys, so put that kind of scenario in your mind. There's a person who is traveling somehow, either their boat or plane or whatever got damaged, and they ended up floating their way towards the island shore. Yeah, Wilson, the volleyball. You guys know the reference. Okay, so it's kind of like that scenario. Imagine this Tom Hanks type character shows up, washes ashore. Now they're on the island, and they're kind of freaked out, like, wow, am I the only one on this island? Maybe they're wondering this. Maybe somebody else who was also on the same vessel as me managed to escape and survive and reach the island as well. So suppose our castaway character arrives on the island from their accident and has that question in their mind. Is there another survivor also on the island like me who's trying to find a way to get off? So that now gives us content to the first premise. Let's suppose we're asking this. If there is another survivor like me who wants to get off the island, then that person, if they exist, would do certain things on the island. Okay, so question. What do you think would be the so-called changes C that our hypothetical other island survivor would do? So basically, like if you were this castaway and you're going to go out looking to see if there was another survivor, what kind of signs would you be looking for? What kind of changes, etc., would you be trying to find on the island to give you this evidence of the other survivor being there? Because right now you don't know if there is one. You're thinking maybe there is. If there is, they would do certain things that I can go look for. Like, for example, remains of fire pits. Yeah, like evidence of active hunting around the island. Maybe anybody else? There's more we can say, but that's along the right size. A campsite, yeah, maybe a little enclosure in a cave or something, a little fire pit, maybe some at least footprints. Maybe the other survivor would be making noise. So if you walk around saying, hey, who's there? They might say, wait, I'm here, I can hear you, right? So signs of life, signs of activity that you would expect from another survivor, like footprints, like evidence of hunting, like a small enclosure built to have shelter overnight, like making sounds, okay? So hopefully there's nothing too strange about this, despite the somewhat complexity of the format of the argument itself. All this is saying is if you thought there was somebody or something that existed and you knew what they would probably do, then you could go looking for that behavior. But if you didn't see any of it after you looked, then you'd come to a certain conclusion. So suppose now that our survivor on the islands looked. They've searched high and low, leaving no stone unturned, like they say, looking at everywhere for the changes that you'd expect if there's another survivor. But guess what? Despite their thorough and extensive search, they don't see any such signs. No footprints, no fire pits, no crude weapons, no SOS in the sand, no noises, nothing. They look for all those things, which would have been the signs of a survivor, but they don't see any of them. So what conclusion does that give to our Tom Hanks castaway figure? After having done the search, conducting the search, not seeing the signs, they would conclude that what? So just let me know that. So that I can see that you're following the logic of the argument here. We've reached the conclusion based on the example, and the subject would conclude what? Having not seen the signs, that there was no one else on the island but him. Yeah. Now, I guess he couldn't say I know for a fact, but he would say I've got good evidence now. You know, before I got up and looked, when I was just sitting there on the shore thinking about what signs I would look for, I guess at that point I couldn't have said that there's no person. But now that I've gone around looking for the signs, not seeing any, it gives me pretty good evidence that there's no such being. Okay? Now, that is just an example given by the author, but the real point that we're going to, of course, lead to from here is applying the same kind of argument to the question of whether God exists, okay? So the author says, if you consider it, there is also some description of what God would do in the universe if he existed. So if there is an all-powerful being with the intention of creating the universe just for the sake of mankind, okay, then we would expect the universe to be a certain way. So like, according to traditional religious practices of the world, they say that God created the universe, but they also say that God created it not just for a random reason, but as a place for mankind specifically to live. After all, they say in the scriptures that we are the children of God, that we're created in God's image. So it's not supposed to be that he created the universe and humans are just an afterthought, like they just kind of randomly or spontaneously happened into existence. But the thought is that God wanted to create a world in which beings that were formed in his image could live. So essentially, I'm telling you that according to traditional religion, God created the universe for the sake of man. Therefore, if God really did create this whole universe as a place for humans to specifically inhabit, you would have expected it to be a certain way. We're supposed to be the crown jewel of the creation. The whole universe is here, but it's here for the sake of our existence. If that's true, then what sort of universe should we expect to find? Well, he says the kind of universe that we would expect to find would be one where it revolves around humanity, where humanity is the centerpiece. So basically, I'm going to erase this now. Remember when I told you guys about what signs would you look for if the other castaway actually survived? He calls those signs that you would look for apt behavior. Like, what's the appropriate behavior of a being that's a survivor on an island trying to find some other survivor? Well, the things that we said, like tracks, weapons, fire pit, sounds, and so on. Not seeing any of those apt behaviors gives you evidence of the non-existence of that being. Well, what would be the apt universe if there's a being called God who creates it for the sake of mankind? He says, here's some things that you should expect the universe to be like if the religious hypothesis of God were true. First of all, if the traditional accounts of theism are correct, you'd expect for mankind, human beings, to appear not long after the start of the universe. So man would appear not long after the beginning of the universe. So if God does exist and he creates the universe for our sake, then you'd think we would have appeared way back in the beginning of it, because what would be the point for God to create a universe for the sake of mankind, but then delay the arrival of mankind by billions and billions of years? What would have been the point of all this open time in the beginning where mankind doesn't yet exist? So if God creates the universe for our sake, you would expect us to exist way back in the beginning. And of course, those that wrote the Bible knew that this would have been the natural assumption, because that's what it does say in Genesis. It says that God, said, "Let there be light," and within the first 7 days of creation, everything was there, including mankind. And on the seventh day, he rested. So if you read the Bible and you take it literally, we did exist within days of the creation of the universe, because it wouldn't have made any sense to people reading the scriptures to think God creates the universe, then says, let me just wait for like 10 billion years, and then I'm going to put mankind inside of it. Why would that be true if he made the universe just for our sake in the first place? So one thing is that you'd expect us to appear early in the beginning. Another point made, which kind of related to that, is that you'd also expect us to appear not too long after the other animals. So man would appear not long after the non-human animals. The other non-human animals. Okay, so if the universe was created by God for the sake of man specifically to live there, then why would he have, first of all, put a bunch of other animals in the universe and waited a long time for man to appear in the picture? You'd think that he would have wanted us to have these animals to maybe use as food and clothing and other resources for ourselves. But what would have been the point in this huge gap in time, with non-human animals running around on the planet Earth for billions of years, and only at the tail end of the historical period, mankind relatively late emerging? So you expect that we would have been way back early in the picture. And again, in Genesis, that is what it says, that within the first 7 days, all the things were created. And that's what you would expect if God did create it for the sake of man. What would be the point of leaving the universe empty of the beings, which is supposed to be the sole rationale for everything, until the later point in time? Third, you'd also expect the Earth, the planet Earth where we live, to be in the middle of the universe. So Earth would be in the center of the universe. Okay, so if God created the universe just for our sake, just for the sake of human beings that live on this planet, then it seems like he would have wanted us to be in the middle of everything and everything to revolve around us. Shouldn't we have a kind of pride of place if we are the crown jewel created in God's image in this universe? And it was actually very important to early generations of the Christian church to hold to this idea that we were in the center. In fact, when Copernicus and Galileo in the early modern late Renaissance period started to use these newly invented telescopes to make more powerful observations of the local solar system, and proved through observation that the sun is in the center of our local solar system and we rotate around it, not the other way around. That discovery was considered so offensive to the religious orthodoxy that people like Galileo actually had to be forced publicly to recant their testimony, meaning say, I don't know, I was possessed by the devil when I wrote that stuff, so that those ideas wouldn't become more popular and widespread. Now, of course, in the centuries since Galileo's work, the Catholic Church has formally apologized to him and his family and his descendants, because everyone knows for a specific fact today that we do rotate around the sun, and we're not even in the center of our local solar system, much less the entire universe. It almost doesn't even make sense to say there's a center of the universe, but at the very least, we're in a non-central location, even with respect to our local solar system. So notice how important it was to reject the idea that we were not in the middle. People were threatened under penalty of death to not even report their scientific findings on those questions. So you'd expect here 3 things if God created the universe just for us. He would put us right smack in the middle, not too much longer after all the other animals, and also we would have been in there way back at the beginning of time. And one more thing is this. You'd expect that the universe would not be vastly larger than the Earth. the universe would not be vastly, vastly larger than the Earth. Okay, so again, if God made this universe just for the sake of human beings which live on the planet Earth, then what would be the point of making so much extra just void space that we can never go to, that we can never explore, that we can't do anything with? If the universe is made for our sake, then shouldn't it be on a human scale, pretty much? What would be the point of all this excess random space out there that has nothing to do with us? And so it was important to early generations of the church to think that we were actually a smaller universe than we are. In fact, if you go way back into the ancient times, some people thought that what we know as stars today, very distant gaseous objects, kind of like our sun, obviously, we know those to be actual stars far away in interstellar space today. But way, way back in time, some people thought that those were not stars. They were actually pinholes that were poked in the shell which encases the local cosmos, and that's just light penetrating through from the heavens that lies outside of this sphere that contains the Earth. But anyway, I'm just trying to make a point to you about how it was important for the church, and to some people still important, to hold fast to these concepts. But now the author is going to let the other shoe drop, and he's now going to say that if you follow scientific research, the modern day current understanding of the universe and the position of man within it shows that none of these things are true. So that's like the equivalent of going through the island, looking for the signs that would verify that the being exists, but not seeing them. So if God did create the universe for our sake and he exists, then you'd expect these things to be true. You'd expect us to appear early, not long after other animals, to be in the center, and for the universe not to be that much bigger than us. But let's now go through the scientific consensus on all these points and show why, at least if you follow science, these things are not true. Everything we learn about the universe in modern science reveals it to be completely different than these set of factors here. So in almost every way, the universe is way different from what we would have expected if the theistic hypothesis were true. So let's go into the relevant facts. First of all, about the age of the universe relative to mankind. Okay, so according to the most reliable scientific estimates, the universe is something on the order of 15 billion years old, okay? The Earth, this planet, something on the order of 5 billion years. Human beings on the planet Earth, I mean, estimates vary, but a good ballpark is something like 100,000 years or so in the current form of Homo sapiens. So 100,000 years in comparison to a 15 billion year span of time in the universe places us at the very, very tail end of the timeline of history. If you wanted to graph that as a sort of visual graph, you have to imagine these proportions. Suppose there's a 24-mile line, almost a regulation marathon, which is 26.2. If this is the timeline of the universe, then relative to that, given these facts that I've stated, human beings appear in the last 1 inch of the 24-mile line. So we're not at the beginning of the timeline according to the scientific understanding of the universe. Far from it. We're very, very late to the party. Or if you prefer a temporal metaphor instead of a spatial metaphor, imagine that we could condense the history of the universe down to 1 year on the planet Earth. So comparable to that, human beings would have appeared in the last 2 seconds of that 1 year span. So right as the ball's about to drop and we're about to say Happy New Year, mankind appears, and that's like the history of the universe, right at the tail end of history. So if theism is true, the author Everett is asking this: if theism was true and God created the universe just for our sake, why would there be this huge gap of time between the existence of the universe and the eventual appearance of humanity on the planet Earth? You would have thought, as this indicates, that God making the universe for our sake would put us way back in the beginning. This makes it seem much more like we weren't the intended point of the universe, but just something that happened to occur through a process that took a long time later. Okay, and so the next thing, that we would appear not long after the other animals. This also doesn't seem to be true according to what we know from the history of the origin of different species. So according to established scientific consensus, life has existed on the planet Earth for about 3.5 billion years. But for a lot of that initial time span, these were relatively unsophisticated forms of life, little microbial forms of life, amoeba and such. And it took much longer for those primitive forms of life to form into vertebrate, reptilian, and then mammalian forms of life So for even 99% of the Earth's own timeline, there was no mankind. Forget the whole universe, but even on the planet Earth, we're rather late to arrive. Okay, what about the Earth being at the center of the universe? Well, I think I spoke to that a little bit. Not only are we not in the center of the whole universe, if that even makes sense, but we're not really even in the center of the local solar system. We are just a third planet away from the sun, and we rotate around that as the central point. And then finally, the scale of the universe is very, very vast. I mean, that's something that we definitely do know. Even think about this, right? You see so many stars out in the night sky. Well, how far away is even the one closest star to our sun? That's Alpha Centauri, which is about 4 light years away. How far is a light year? It's almost indescribable length. Take the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles per second, or about like 300,000 kilometers per second. That's in every 1 second, a beam of light travels 186,000 miles. That's the maximum achievable speed in the physical universe. The carrier of all information is light. So if you had a vessel that was traveling at the full speed of light for a complete presidential term, 4 years, then that's how long it would take for it to reach just the next star. And the universe is not separated by only 4 light years. There are billions and billions of light years that span the vast expanse of the cosmos. So it's almost hard to fathom how big the universe is in comparison to the planet Earth. I mean, we are literally like a tiny little atom in a much, much larger cosmic structure. So how much sense does it make to say that the universe was created just for the sake of the people on this one planet if we are so infinitesimally small in comparison to the rest of the universe? So essentially concludes then, if theism was true, the universe we're living in wouldn't be the way that it actually appears to be according to science. And so now this is how it plays back into his conceptual argument that we mentioned earlier about if there's a being with nature N and intentions I that produce change C in the world doesn't display those changes, so there's evidence the being doesn't exist. If God exists and creates the universe for the sake of man with his ultimate power, then you'd expect man to appear early, not long after the animals, be placed in the middle in a universe that's not way bigger than us, because what would be the point of all that extra space? But in fact, at least according to science, we didn't appear early, we appeared way later after the animals, we're not in the middle, and we're a tiny part of this big universe. So in every way, it seems that the scientific consensus contradicts these natural assumptions that would come from there being a creator God. So in the end, he says these two things don't fit well together. Science and religion do not necessarily coincide. They're in tension with another. So he says if you have a thoroughgoing scientific perspective on the world, then you have to reject certain traditional assumptions of religion, or vice versa. If you're very traditional about religion and you hold fast to these assumptions, then you're going to have to reject certain scientific theories and established consensus. So he thinks there's no happy middle ground between the two. I've heard some say, though, that if you sort of finesse the interpretation of religion the right way, you can bring it into consistency with what they say in science. Like I've heard some say that when it says in the Bible, God created the universe in 7 days and on the 7th day he rested, some say we're not supposed to take that literally. When it says 7 days, that's arbitrary. A day could be any unit of time because we're talking about God himself and not just revolving around the sun on our axis on the planet Earth every 24 hours. But I think in a way that those are sometimes disingenuous attempts to cover for inconsistencies between the traditional interpretation and the scientific consensus, because nobody was thinking of revising the literal interpretation until it was put under pressure by the discoveries of science. It's not like prior to the discovery of the size of the universe, theologians were sitting back and saying, but what does really a day mean when it says day in the Bible? The most natural interpretation would have been the familiar 24-hour day. But now it's like ripe for reinterpretation because it seems like that's not going to coalesce with what scientific findings are. So I sometimes think that these attempts to bring into compatibility the two spheres of thought, sometimes they look to me as though they're a bit ex post facto rationalizations. You know, after the fact, let's correct the interpretation to bring it into line with what new things we are learning. But anyway, some people think there's a way of reconciling these loose ends. The author Everett, anyway, seems to be emphasizing that that's not really so easy to do. So here, let me read a little bit of his words, and then that'll kind of connect to the discussion in the class. He says, as an example of the argument at work Consider an updated Robinson Crusoe. Suppose he considers the hypothesis that somewhere else on the island with him is another survivor of the shipwreck, similar to himself in the physical and mental capacities, including his beliefs, and with the intention of making contact with any other survivors. Even given these vague hypotheses about him, Crusoe can make some predictions about what the survivor might do. He can formulate in his mind a range of what we might call apt behavior, which the survivor might display. It would be apt if, for example, the survivor left visible signs of his presence on the island, marks on trees, scratchings on rocks, carefully arranged pieces of wood or stone. It would be apt if he emitted characteristically human noises, whistling, singing, shouting. It would be apt if he lit a fire and tried to send smoke signals. These would be apt pieces of behavior because they are the sort of things which a survivor would do if he were trying to let others know of his existence. So, if he looks hard and carefully for evidence of what we would call apt behavior and finds none, this gives evidence against the hypothesis that the survivor exists. So let us see how considerations of this kind can be applied on the cosmic scale, and how the nature of the universe revealed by science gives us reason to reject theism. Consider first the account of God's nature and purpose which theism presents us with. Theism tells us that God is a being who is omnipotent and omniscient, totally self-sufficient, with no needs, lacks, or deficiencies of any kind. For reasons that are not totally clear, God decides to create a universe where human beings will be the crown jewel. Although he cares for all the creation, God has a special care for human beings and will give these creatures the power of free choice. Now, with our example of Crusoe, it's difficult to answer the question, what kind of world would you expect this being to create, given this much information about the nature of his plans? It says, you would be led to expect that human beings would appear fairly soon after the start of the universe. For given the central role of humanity, what would be the point of the universe which came into existence and then existed for unimaginable stretches of time without the presence of the very species that was the whole point of it? You would expect humans to appear after other animals, but not long after them, because what would be the point of the universe existing for so long, full of animals created for us without us being there? Furthermore, you would expect the Earth to be near the center of the universe. You'd expect the total universe to be not many orders of magnitude greater than the size of the Earth. The universe should be on a human scale, everything revolving around us and shrunk down to our scale. These expectations are largely what we find in the Genesis story of creation, with which so there is a logic to the picture of the universe with which Genesis presents us. Given the initial assumptions about God, his intentions, and nature, the Genesis universe is pretty much how it would be reasonable for God to proceed. But given theism and given the hypothesis of theism and no scientific knowledge, and then asked to construct a picture of the universe, the Genesis story is what you would come up with. But the question now to raise is this: is the universe revealed to us by science the sort of universe that we would have expected the traditional God to create? The short answer is no. In almost every respect, the universe as it is revealed by science is hugely unlike the sort of universe which traditional theism would lead us to expect. He says, first, in terms of age, our best estimates are that the universe is 15 billion years old, the Earth is 5 billion years old. How long humans have existed depends partly on what we take to be human, but if we think of it as Homo sapiens, roughly 100,000 years. So if we imagine the history of the universe represented by a line which is 24 miles long, human life would occupy only the last inch. So for more than 99.999% of the history of the universe, humans were not present. So why then, given theism, would be the point of the huge discrepancy between the age of the universe and the age of mankind? The same recurs if we turn to the size of the universe. Suppose we take the size of our solar system to be within the parameters of the theistic hypothesis. Why do we need a sun that is 93 million miles from Earth? Why wouldn't 93,000 miles have been enough? Of course, the laws of physics would have had to be different then, but God is omnipotent, so he could have done that. He could have adjusted those laws. However, let us overlook this and allow that a distance of 93 million miles is intelligible. Of course, we now know that the universe is staggeringly larger than any such size. The sun is 8 light minutes from us, but the next nearest star is 4.3 light years. And then, he goes into even bigger scales of distance. There's 100 trillion galaxies, each with 1 billion stars. So this is a vastly larger universe than the planet Earth. Why would it have so much unused and random blank space if it's just here for us? So I guess that's really everything from Nicholas Everett's paper that I had for you guys in terms of notes. So I guess at this point, we're almost ready to move into our next topic on Tuesday of next week. Let me see if anyone here had any other questions or comments or reactions to the material today. Just here in the chat, if you've got anything that you'd like me to go over again. And while you're collecting your thoughts, I'll just speak a little bit. Nicholas Everett doesn't exactly neatly fit in as an objection to the specific arguments that we've looked at for God's existence, but I sometimes think that a person could attempt to characterize it as a way of looking back at Pascal critically, because Pascal says there's no way to prove whether God exists or not, and therefore we just have to make a choice based on a wager. But Everett is sort of saying that there actually is evidence that God doesn't exist. So the claim that there's no such evidence either way, he would say, is not true. The evidence is that the features you'd expect to have seen in the universe, supposing God exists, are not there and are actually contradicted by what science has found. So, I mean, you could use that as a possible way to refute the idea that no evidence exists, that there's no God. But I do think that sort of like McKim and Clifford are more directly pointed at ideas of Pascal's wager in terms of objections. But Everett's also somewhere there in the mix, so just another author for you to consider. Now, though, we've reached the end of our whole 4-week unit on the philosophy of religion. So our crash course in arguments about the existence, non-existence of God has come to a close. Next week on Tuesday when we resume, we'll start dealing with the second subject, which is ethics. Ethics is all about morality and the theoretical study of moral concepts. So that's a very fun, interesting topic. Everyone, I think, has a sense inside of right and wrong. Many of us would say we have a moral compass that we've got from somewhere. We're going to try and study the theoretical basis of morality according to a few different important Western authors. There are some very important and powerful writings in the West on the topic of ethics. You might be surprised to know that many people think it's not just all subjective. I think that's the kind of common consensus of many people, especially young people, that ethics is just sort of up to me and my point of view. But there are what we call moral universalist theories. And there's some people who think that there's actually an objective content to ethics that the reason of our mind can discover. So we're going to learn a few different of those powerful ethical theories. We're going to study what I think are the big two, the two major rivals in the space of competition for ethical theories. There's one called Utilitarian Ethics, and we're going to deal with that next week. Afterwards, there's what's called Kantian ethics. So Utilitarian Ethics is given by John Stuart Mill. We're going to study his writings, a powerful set of writings from a 19th century British philosopher and political economist, John Stuart Mill. And then there's the work of Immanuel Kant. That's a German philosopher of the 18th century. And he has a much different perspective on ethics, and you're going to see how these two accounts are quite different and how they actually give us different guidance in the same scenarios. And then your own intuition will be the one to sort of decide which do you think is more reasonable, if either. So ethics is our next subject, I guess, next week. Let me know, guys, is everything good? If you've got no questions and you feel satisfied with the meeting, just let me know in the chat, and then I'll, I guess, be able to close this a little early. We're doing very well on the notes. It seems like we've got through all the material today. Sometimes I have additional time allotted during the meetings in case discussion breaks out, but it seems like today it kind of came through pretty straightforwardly. That's why we have a few minutes of spare time at the end here. But let me know if we're good to go, because I don't like to close before I get some reaction back from our students here. So yeah. Is there anything else due besides our essay in March? No, there's only the essay due March 4th for now. And you'll see in the calendar on our syllabus the specific due dates. There's 4 things in this class. You have 2 essays and 2 tests. The first essay is due March 4th. Let me look at the syllabus because I've actually got it on my desktop right now, and I can just tell you a little bit more. First essay due March 4th, midterm exam March 23rd. So that's another 2 weeks or almost 2 weeks after the essay due date. And I'll have the essays graded before then, and we have a review session on March 18th. Prior to the essay and the review session, I'll be sending everyone the study guide, and you'll be able to prepare for that and take our review session with the study guide in hand. So yeah, we have our schedule charted out. First essay March 4th, midterm exam March 23rd. Following after that, we have a spring break, And then the second essay is due way later during week 14. And then finals week will be May 18th, the final exam. Okay. So, all right, guys, then I guess seems like we're all right. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day, good weekend. If you need anything over the weekend, just email me and I'll be in touch. But for now, then, take it easy, guys, and I'll see you next time. Signing off. Okay.